So, friends, there's some remarkable new reporting in the New York Times about how even federal judges are sounding alarm bells regarding how the Supreme Court is ruling in favor of Donald Trump on the so-called shadow docket. Look at this headline. Federal judges warning of judicial crisis, fault Supreme Court's emergency orders. More than 36 federal judges have told the New York Times that the Supreme Court's flurry of brief, opaque emergency orders in cases related to the Trump administration have left them confused about how to proceed in those matters and are hurting the judiciary's image with the public. Now, in case anybody's thinking, well, this is the New York Times, so they probably only talk to judges who were appointed by presidents who were Democrats. There are the numbers. They talked to 37 federal judges who were appointed by presidents who were Democrats, 28 federal judges appointed by Republicans, including 10 judges appointed by Donald Trump himself. Now, friends, when I saw this new reporting, I turned, once again, to my friend Kim Wehle. Kim is a law professor. She's a constitutional law scholar, and she's a former federal prosecutor. And I asked Kim to help us unravel and explain this new reporting. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with law professor Kim Wehle. So first of all, Kim, as you all know, I've introduced her before, constitutional law scholar, 17-year law professor at the University of Baltimore Law School, a former federal prosecutor, a justice warrior who attends our annual Team Justice gatherings in D.C. each year and gives the crowd a full dose of what's going on in sort of a clear-eyed way that both gets us whipped up and energized and scares the bejesus out of us. But these are things we need to know. And Kim is an expert on really all things Supreme Court, Constitution. And she's an author of a number of books. I'm going to plug the most recent one, The Pardon Power, which is kind of must reading at this moment because we are forever talking about not only the crimes that Donald Trump appears to be committing, most notably in recent weeks, killing people in international waters, murdering them. We've talked to a number of military law experts. But we are forever also talking about just how broad, unfettered, unchecked, unconstrained his pardon power is. So is it, going to come to pass that the people who are carrying out his unlawful orders in the military or elsewhere are also going to be recipients of pardons so that everybody gets away, unaccountable for these crimes? These are nightmare scenarios. But first of all, welcome, Kim. Thank you for jumping back on with us. And I want to touch on this new New York Times article.
Great, as always, to be with you, Glenn, from Amsterdam, which is partly why I assume we're getting on early because I'm way ahead of you all time-wise, but it's a really poignant moment to talk about these things. People care a lot about it in Europe as well. People are listening and watching what's happening in the U.S.
So here's the headline in this new New York Times article. Federal judges warning of judicial crisis, fault Supreme Court's emergency orders. And it is a deep dive that surveyed many, many federal court judges. Really a surprising number of active federal court judges were willing to talk to the New York Times about their view of what the Supreme Court's been doing and how it's been doing it, notably on the shadow docket with no analysis and no guidance to the lower court judges. Imagine if your superiors, after you
poured hundreds or thousands of hours into your work product, 100-page opinion, meticulously detailing the facts and applying the relevant case law. All of a sudden, your supervisor said, you're wrong. We're not going to tell you how you're wrong. We're not going to tell you why you're wrong. And we're not going to tell you how to do it better in the future when these issues, are again before you, which they inevitably will be, but you are wrong. That is corrosive, I think, in my opinion, to the operation of the federal judiciary. And we see that reflected in this new New York Times piece where federal judges are speaking out, even if only anonymously. What was your take when you read this?
Well, it's in addition to the fact that there's this not having the lower courts back this way and this chiding these lower court judges, but there's been some violence against judges, right? I think we're in a moment. One judge's house was firebombed, where these judges pushing back on the Trump administration, applying the law. Right? They're not doing anything wrong. They are applying existing law. They're applying the law of the express language of the Constitution, the due process clause of the Fifth Amendment. They're applying established Supreme Court precedent like Humphrey's executor that protects certain officials from being fired under statutory law. And the Supreme Court, in 21 out of 23 emergency petitions from the president, is saying, "Oh no, we're going to reverse you because you applied established law. You applied the United States Constitution." So my reaction to this is twofold, Glenn. One, in addition to just saying these are patriots, these judges, right? They should be protected. Um, my first point is this is extremely outside the bounds of protocol for judges to do this. It's a little bit like we saw with the military a while back, where you've got established generals in the military. I think this was after the first Trump administration coming out and speaking publicly. Whoa, whoa, whoa! This is not how it's supposed to be. So the fact that these judges came out with this kind of in these numbers to the New York Times is really telling about how serious it is. The other part is we have an extra constitutional Supreme Court majority. We have a Supreme Court majority that is not upholding the rule of law. We have a president who's not upholding the rule of law, and we have a Supreme Court majority in these shadow docket rulings that are coming behind this president and saying, "We're going to suspend the law for you." And the lower judges are saying, whoa, 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 what are we supposed to do now? Our job is to apply your law, the Constitution, which is above you. We actually creates you, Supreme Court. And now you're telling us when we do our job, we were wrong, but you're not actually reversing anything. You can't reverse the Constitution. And meanwhile, then the president and the administration gets to call us bad judges. And then we and our families are personally vulnerable to hostile acts by people who wrongly believe we are somehow the bad guys, when that is not in any way, shape, or form the case with the vast, vast majority of these judges.
Boy, and what sort of dangerous and desperate times we are living in when you frame it that way, when six justices are willing to endure and endorse Donald Trump's lawlessness, even after federal court judges have found that no, he's acting either lawlessly or in violation of the Constitution or both. And as you mentioned, as I fight this coughing fit, there were lots of judges who were surveyed for this article. 37 of them were appointed by Democrats. Excuse me. 28 were appointed by Republican presidents, including 10 who were nominated by Donald Trump himself. So this is not the New York Times cherry picking and only asking judges for their opinion if they were appointed by presidents who were Democrats. So what is your take on the fact that federal court judges are so willing to talk openly about the Supreme Court when I think in our lifetime, that has not been I mean, mum is the word when it comes to lower court judges talking about the rulings or the approach that superior court judges, federal circuit courts of appeal, Supreme Court justices are taking in these cases.
I think they're probably panicked and they're afraid.
Yeah.
They're afraid for the future of the republic, the future of the country, the future of the rule of law. What is the rule of law? The rule of law means there's a set of rules, laws, starting with the Constitution that apply to everybody in the country, and including our elected leaders, including judges, because that way we're not a monarchy. That way, what's a monarchy? An unlimited monarchy? The person in charge gets to pick winners and losers arbitrarily based on whether he or she likes you or not. And we're seeing this with these vindictive prosecutions, right? The judges are appointed for life. They're not elected at the federal level. And the idea is they are a bulwark against tyranny. They're a bulwark against arbitrary winners and losers or a loss of liberty. That's due process. People being detained, thrown in jail without due process. They understand that if the judiciary no longer holds, if judicial rulings become optional, then we are a lawless system. And that is going to trickle down to everyone in America. When you can't go to court and get a neutral judge to listen to the facts, to listen to the law, and to decide who wins, that it becomes one of these things about who you know, how much money you can use to bribe the people in power. I mean, this is the case in a lot of parts of the world, Glenn. And I don't think Americans have any concept. We've been very lucky of what that means. And I believe these judges are saying, wait a minute, this isn't what we signed up for. This is really dangerous that we are issuing rulings. And just to be clear, a lot of what they're doing is not ambiguous. A lot of law, as you and I know, it's kind of this squishy gray area. We're not really sure. There's not a clear statute. There's not a clear Supreme Court ruling. There's not a clear provision of the Constitution. It's in the middle, squishy stuff. We need a judge to resolve it. These judges are applying the plain law. There is a due process clause. There is freedom of speech. There is freedom of the press. There is freedom of assembly. There is a U.S. Congress who passes laws under Article 1 that need to be followed by the president unless Congress changes the law. This stuff is seventh grade civics. Glenn, this is not squishy middle stuff we even need judges for. And they're saying, listen, if the Supreme Court doesn't have our back, who does?
Yeah.
Who is there to enforce the law if the highest court in the land is turning their backs on the Constitution and the rule of law itself?
Last question about this New York Times article. Then I want to touch just briefly on something I saw Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett say on Fox News, which popped up in my feed this morning. I raised an eyebrow when I saw an active Supreme Court justice is going on Fox News to peddle her book. But before we get to that, this is going to call for some speculation or an informed opinion. What these judges, these federal court judges have said, which, I mean, there are screaming alarm bells based on what they are saying. Do you think it will have any impact on the nature, the decisions, the trajectory of the six justice majority on the Supreme Court?
I hate to answer it this way, but no, I don't, Glenn. I really don't. I mean, all of them took an oath to uphold the Constitution. It's not optional. It's not optional for these justices. They don't get to suspend the due process clause for certain people and allow the Trump administration to send them to South Sudan, where they're not from, when there's a very complex statutory procedure for sending somebody to a country they're not from, when it's established in the record that they could be tortured and killed there. This is the stuff of law school hypotheticals, Glenn, that I would never put on a law school exam because you're not testing anything. Every single student would get 100% because it's so obvious. If this majority is willing to do that, I don't think these lower federal court judges, which they have one judge, a very well respected judge, lower court judge in his 80s, who's been on the bench forever. He didn't treat one of these emergency rulings as binding, and he was reprimanded by the Supreme Court. And so you lower court judges don't have an option, I'm paraphrasing, to ignore us. They seem to think they are the Constitution. They are the law now. So unfortunately, I think it's more important, Glenn, for regular citizens, and I can see in the chat people are hearing this. It's really, really, really crucial for Americans to understand how the Supreme Court functions, for Americans to understand that they have limited power and they're going beyond that, for Americans to understand what they say is not gospel and should not be treated that way, and for people to share the fact that lower federal court judges are concerned. And we all have to come together and demand something else. Or these justices should not, frankly, be in these jobs if they're not willing to abide by their oath to uphold and defend the United States Constitution.
Yeah. And I think the fact that the judges who are quoted, if not by name, they're at least by the president who appointed them to the bench. And it's a substantial number of Republican appointed judges, Trump appointed judges, Democrat appointed judges, and they're all sounding the alarm. I mean, that should tell us that this is really not about politics. It's about the rule of law and the Constitution. And, we are in such a desperate spot right now. Let me turn to another development that is no better. But, when I woke up and I saw on my feed today that Justice Amy Coney Barrett appeared on Fox News selling her book called Listening to the Law. One could argue they're not exactly listening to the Constitution, but she was talking about the role of Supreme Court justices. And when she said the following, I just felt like, okay, this is dripping in irony. She said,
they, meaning Supreme Court justices, they are referees, not kings, because they decide whether people have played by the rules rather than what the rules should be.
And yet, correct me if I'm wrong, Justice Coney Barrett, you decided that even though Donald Trump didn't play by the rules, the federal laws violated them. You then decided to sort of change the rules writ large and give him immunity. Tell him he doesn't have to play by those particular rules, even though there's nothing in the Constitution that provides that a president is above the law or enjoys absolute immunity for violating our nation's federal laws. I would argue the exact opposite really is laid out in the Constitution in both the impeachment judgment clause and the take care to faithfully execute the laws of the nation clause. So that seems the height of hypocrisy that she's boasting and crowing about. No, no, no. We just make sure everybody plays by the rules. And yet they set out a completely separate rule for Donald Trump.
And as I said, they've been ignoring other parts of the Constitution. When lower court judges say, wait a minute, an preliminary injunction or TRO, temporary restraining order, is a wait a minute order. Like, whoa, Trump, you can't do this because we've got laws that say you can't. Let's now adjudicate this and go through the whole process and appeal before you get to continue to do that. This Supreme Court is coming in and saying, no, we're going to overturn the wait a minute order. We're going to put the cart before the horse. Go ahead, violate all you want, and then we'll try to put the Humpty Dumpty back together later. I hear that, Glenn. To me, it sounds like propaganda because what she's saying is true. That is what the Supreme Court should be doing. I think it's what it's traditionally done. Certainly in all these years I've been teaching constitutional law, you can disagree on the outcome. There are various ways of interpreting ambiguous language. That they're not doing that. They're just ignoring it for one person. And so for her to get on Fox News and say that, it's almost like a cover to get people off the scent for what's actually happening, where she's just declaring, she's almost admitting that what they're doing is not right. because what she says is the opposite, to your point, of what they're actually doing. They're ignoring the Constitution and the rule of law in these emergency orders time and time and time again. And if you don't believe us, first of all, as you indicated, all these federal judges have said this to the New York Times, but pull up some of these emergency orders and read the scathing dissents by Justices Kagan, Justice Jackson, Justice Sotomayor. They lay it out, and they lay it out in very clear English. And it's not getting much coverage. If you want to know from a sitting Supreme Court justice what the majority is doing, read one of those dissenting opinions. And I have a lot of them hyperlinked in my work. I'm sure you've linked to some of these emergency orders. Regular people can see how off the rails this Supreme Court is, and how basically Amy Coney Barrett is being very disingenuous, setting aside whether it's okay to hawk her book on Fox. They don't have an ethics code that's actually enforceable and meaningful. But even setting that aside, that is suggesting, I don't even know what to say about that, because it's just not what she's doing as a member of the 6-3 majority right now.
Okay, briefly, let's finish with this. Do you see any points of light? Do you see any sliver of hope? Anything that leaves you even a little bit optimistic with what's going on the legal landscape?
Yeah, we've had multiple orders, injunctions in the last week or so on the use of National Guard troops in Chicago and Portland and hijacking them from other parts of the country. I mean, the lower federal court judges, and I think this New York Times piece is showing it, they're holding it. They are functioning. The rule of law is functioning, right? So the question is, when these go up to the Supreme Court, what's the court going to do? I'm not optimistic, but I do think if enough people are aware of this and they make it clear, we are not okay with reversing these lower court judges who are enforcing the basic law. You know, if these Supreme Court justices are political and ideological, which it seems like they are, maybe that will have some shaming effect or some impact on them. That to me is the most hopeful glimmer, and that means share this information with as many people as you can, to demand that these judges have the support of the American people, because these judges are holding the rule of law. The Supreme Court is not, but the other judges are. And I think that is absolutely a ray of light, given that some of them are going into harm's way by speaking the truth in this way.
Yeah, and those judges include judges appointed by Donald Trump himself, like Karen Immergut, who said, and I quote, that, Trump's assertions are untethered to the facts. I don't know, the appellate courts are supposed to be courts of law. They're not fact finders. And you have trial court judges who are entering findings of fact that are eminently supported. And they tend to show that Donald Trump is acting in just blatantly lawless ways. So let's hope that, that begins to have an impact, if not win the day. And let me just ask you to tell people where they can find you. But let me first say, please, please, please subscribe to Kim on Substack.
Thanks. Yeah, Kim Wehle, Wehle. My Substack's called The Little Law School, and I try to break down little law school lessons on all of this stuff. I'm also, on Instagram at Kim Wehle, on Blue Sky, Wehle. Wehle rhymes with daily. So thanks so much. It's always such a great opportunity, Glenn, to chat with you about this stuff, and it's so important.
Yeah, and we'll do it again soon. Thank you, Kim. Enjoy your time there.
I will.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Bye. Bye, everyone.